never reported. So I do want to just, I'm going to pull up a little PDF I have, hitting got it here. Got it. Just to share this, but I won't stick with this the whole time. It'll have some talking points on it. Can everybody see this okay? It's just a little reddish orange sheet. So yeah, preparing for BEAT is a little bit maybe more specific than a lot of you probably will be general assignment reporters, but the preparation and some of the things that you can do to have less nervousness, it's really just landing in a new place to write about the community. What do you do? And so I want to talk about that for a bit and talk about some sites that might be useful as well and some techniques that would be useful. So if you haven't had a chance yet to really go through the publication that you're going to be writing for, whether it's, you know, multimedia or audio, a radio site or print, I didn't hear anybody say they were working for TV, so I won't belabor that point. But the thing to do is to really do a deep dive as much as you can before you get there into what they've been covering recently, especially. Go through that site, figure out what some of the competitor sites are in the community and look at them as well. So for instance, if you're going to be reporting at the Daily Record in Baltimore, even though it's a business publication, it's a Baltimore-based publication, you probably want to be looking at the Sun and the Baltimore Banner too. And, you know, look and see what some of the big stories are, but also some of the continuing stories. You know, either they might have done some big project work in the last month, but also I'm sure that there are some topics that the stories have a long thread, and there are a lot of stories that follow the initial one. You know, one story begets the next because new questions arise. And so particularly on those kinds of stories where they're continuing to pull the thread on a topic, you want to see what's been written and what questions you have in your head after reading the stories. Because these aren't books, these are quick breaking pieces of daily journalism often, and you want to see, you're smart, you probably are going to have some questions on what was written. So what I would do honestly is start a spreadsheet. Some of the things especially that you think you might be doing follow-ups on or that you're interested in, start a spreadsheet. Google Sheets is free, just pop it open. Start putting some of the names of people who are quoted in the stories into the spreadsheet, because they might be people that you can then introduce yourself to when you land in the community that you're going to be covering. So, you know, what are you going to put in the spreadsheet? Their name, their title. Look and see if you can find them. Hopefully you've all got Twitter accounts. I know there's a lot of weird stuff going on with the new owner, but there's still a lot of strong journalism going on Twitter. So look and see if these folks have a Twitter account and if they're posting regularly there. Put that handle for them there. Look and see if they're on LinkedIn and if there's a way for you to connect with them there. And then make a note to yourself that you're going to want to, if you feel like they pop up in a lot of stories that you're interested in, make a note that you're going to want to talk to them when you get there. You know, you can start with an initial either a little, just a message through Twitter. You could start with a direct message, that is. You could start with an email or a phone number if you can find that in a directory. Introduce yourself, say, I'm wondering if I can stop by and have a cup of coffee with you. I'm really curious about this big project that you're working on, or this case that you're handling, or, you know, the crime issue in some of the communities that are part of your geographic beat area. So don't be afraid to start when you see people that look like they're useful, that they're saying a lot about things that are important to your community. See if you can have time, a cup of coffee, or just drop by their office. Say, could I have 20 minutes of your time? I want to introduce myself. I'm new to the beat, and I'd love to hear, you know, a little bit about what you're working on right now. I think that's kind of the scarier thing for some people. I know I initially, especially as a young journalist, was worried about calling people with big titles and saying I wanted to talk to them. But do realize you're in this job, you're in this school that you're in your, you know, heading towards this career because you are smart and curious. And as long as you do some preparation, you're not going to embarrass yourself. You're going to be able to have a good conversation with them. So give yourself a pat on the back that you're as far as you are. That means that you're on the ball and you're capable of doing this. So yes, just start, you need to read a lot, and you need to start getting yourself out, making calls to people, showing up. I've talked to some of my friends. I covered politics for a lot of years, both at the county level, the state house level, and then in Congress. And invariably, what you need to do is go to a lot of sessions, go to a lot of meetings, because even if you're not going to be covering it for that day's story, you're going to hear how they do things. You're going to hear who speaks up a lot. You're going to see who some of the players are on the body that you're covering, whether it's a council or a legislative body. Who are the vocal people? Who are the ones that seem to know what they're doing? And then who's their staff? Because a lot of times these people would not be successful if they didn't have a good chief of staff, a good legislative aide, to help fill them in on some of the policy issues that they're talking about. So it's not just the bigger names that you need to get to know. It's sometimes the other people that work for them that have really good details on some of the policy issues or the problems that you're concerned about. And do remember too, it's not just people that have the titles that are important. Walking around a community will really get yourself thinking. Walk or drive around the neighborhood that you're going to be covering. What's happening there? Are there a lot of buildings boarded up? Are there are the streets barren? I know what shocked me after COVID was driving down in DC, and there's like nobody walking around, right? So many people were still working at home, just walking around, driving around, going to a little diner in the community, going somewhere and sitting down and listening to people talk around you. If you're like me, I think a lot of journalists are big eavesdroppers, and it's not like you're doing it to immediately write a story based on what you heard, but you're getting ideas. What do people talk about when they hang out somewhere? What's the conversation about? What are their worries? So you need to be there in the community, walking around, driving around, to get a sense of what's happening and to start meeting people as well. But going to some of those early meetings, whether or not it's just a feature story where you go out and they're talking about it's the 20th anniversary of something that happened in town, it's a way to introduce yourself to a lot of different people from different walks of life, just going to that, even if it's not an initial story. So I can't stress enough. I know we all have our phones, and we probably all overuse our phones, and we know how to Google, but that shoe leather stuff that you heard generations of reporter talk about is still really critical to getting a sense of the community that you're working in. So, and just think too about what are some of the big stories that you're seeing, and are they national stories that could be localized? A lot of reporters cover Congress, but a lot of them aren't covering it for a national audience. They're writing about it for, the Frederick News Post or the Hagerstown Daily Mail. And so how do you take a story about Biden meeting with the Speaker of the House to talk about the debt ceiling? How do you make that personal to your community? So what would that mean if some of the cuts that the Republicans are proposing, what would that mean to your community, your neighborhood, if they went into play? What would that mean to people's, Medicare payments, or some of the other big programs that they're talking about slashing, if those came into play? So often just thinking about what's trending nationally and how would that affect my local neck of the woods, and who could I talk to then? So think about not just, all the little local stories, but also are there big stories that can be made local? So that means you're reading about what we're doing in Ukraine, the money that we're sending there, the people that we're sending there, the training we're giving to soldiers there. Do you have bases? Do you have military bases in your community? If you're covering, are there folks at that base involved with helping to send munitions over to help with training, right? So look around and see what's there where you are and how that might be impacted by things going on at the national level. There are other big stories that, for the last few years, they're not going away. The problems that the whole country's having with hate crimes, the escalation of hate crimes about non-white citizens. what's going on with the police in the community? Are there investigations into any issues with the police in your city or your county? I know here at where University of Maryland's based, Prince George's County has had a history of some irregularities with police. And so there are oversight boards that have been established, and where do they stand with investigations? So just start to ask some questions, and actually some folks in the newsroom might be able to help point you in some of these directions too. The other thing is, when you get to the newsroom, I'm just going to segue off of this for a minute because that's important. As a new reporter, it's really important to realize you're not going to know everything, right? There are going to be a lot of reporters there. They might have been there for 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. They're really familiar with the community. And I can tell you, invariably, reporters like to help other reporters. I used to like to position myself when I knew there were senior reporters in a newsroom, especially I wasn't, I never had the courthouse as a beat. I did stories about courts or that used court records, but it was never my full-time beat. And I would kind of hang out and sit near reporters who did that all the time. And they would help me, just like, how do you find these records at the courthouse? Like, they'll share that with you. Most reporters are very generous, especially if they're in your own newsroom. And even I've found on a beat covering politics at the State House, people help each other so much to find information because everybody wants the news to get out. Granted, if they're working on a scoop that's going to be only to that publication, they're not going to give you your scoop. But if you're just trying to figure out how to cover something that's a normal meeting, other people are going to help you. So don't be afraid to ask them, okay? You hopefully will be happily surprised at how generous people are with their time and information. So position yourself near people who are senior in the newsroom who might be able to help you out as you're trying to get your feet and figure out things going on there too. And yeah, just all the time when I read stories, I'm always like, well, they should have asked X, or why didn't they talk about Y? And that gives you the opening to do a follow on that thing that was missing from the story that you read. So don't be bashful about pitching that to your bosses too. So I'm just going to, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but the beat list is important. Honestly, in a lot of our newsrooms at Maryland, we require this, and especially in some of the capstone, students hand off the beat list from one exiting reporter to the incoming one. But having this allows you to put some categories even. So, we mentioned putting their name and their title and some contact numbers and handles there with them. But also when you talk to folks, put little bits of things in that they tell you, like if they say, yeah, I just had a new baby and I'm not sleeping much at night at all, jot down in an extra column or other column, so-and-so just had a new baby, so that when you talk to them the next time, that's something that you connect with on a human level. And you mention, how are you doing? How's your baby doing? It makes people more comfortable with talking to you if you remember stuff about them. And if you have a kind of a crappy memory like I do, I keep a lot of notes. I keep little things to help trigger name. I'm terrible at names, but if I have a little thing in a spreadsheet that helps me, oh yeah, this person said their spouse is X and they're actually about to do Y. Those little things help with conversation, right? So it's not just the bare minimum factoids that go in there, but sometimes little conversation generators help as well. All right. So the other thing is a lot of my students who've gotten really adept with social media, I've followed them as they've hopped onto new beats, and I like what they're doing where they introduce themselves onto Twitter when they arrive in the community. And so if you're on Twitter and you don't have stuff in there that you're embarrassed about, if you've not been too personal with the information you've posted to Twitter, you could use it while you're at your new assignment too. I would check with your editor to make sure that that's what they do, but it can be very useful with introductions. So, even as basic, and one of my students did this when she was out in Annapolis, so your name, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm covering whatever the thing is. I'm a new general assignment reporter for the Annapolis Capitol. Direct message me if you've got stories you think I should cover, and then put some hashtags with that, because if it was general assignment or education, whatever it is, it'll sort of pop up in the stream of conversation with that topic. Make sure that you put your publications handle, the at. You'd be surprised. You might start getting some people just saying, hey, I'm really happy to see you. They need to do more with Y, right? It's immediately you've made a connection. At least they're aware that you're out there and you're interested in talking to people. So leverage that. Have any of you done that before when you've done stuff at school? Introduced yourself that way on a stream? No, not yet. Try it. Because this is something some of my students who are younger, newer reporters have tried and said it's worked for them. Yeah, so I talked about driving around, walking around, can't stress that enough, and sitting around in places where people gather and listening to conversations, because it does start to help yield ideas in your own head. So the goal is to try to walk into your newsroom with a few ideas. And don't be worried. One of you mentioned that you were worried that your pitches weren't going to be good enough or that they weren't going to be sharp enough. Just coming in and making an attempt is going to be impressive to your editors, that you didn't come in with 0 ideas, right? So just saying, did you guys ever think about doing X or Y, shows that you're trying to contribute right away and that you're trying to generate ideas. So do that. Don't be bashful about doing that. And then they might say, yeah, we did that 3 months ago, but maybe X, maybe then they would sort of pitch off of your pitch. It starts a conversation, it starts generating ideas, and only good will come of that. They're not going to think you're being silly. They're going to think you're being on the ball. And the more you do it, the more you talk to your assignment editors and say, have you ever thought of doing this? The more likely they are to think of sort of better stories for you, because they'll start thinking of you as an idea generator. I know for me, my goal was to avoid the daily weather stories if I could, because I felt like if you didn't have an idea, the editor's going to walk over to you and say, how's the drought this year? Or it sure is raining hard out there. Go out and talk to people about the rain. And although some weather stories can be fun, getting a lot of weather stories in one summer probably wouldn't be fun. So you want to have ideas coming from yourself that you've got a stake in, that you really want to do, versus ideas from somebody else that you might not have an interest in at all, right? So read and talk and you will start getting ideas. So I was going to link here, show you real quick some other sites. So obviously when you when you actually start working on some stories, you're generating stories and ideas, you want to know where to go to get background information, details, stuff that's reliable and not junk, basically from the internet. And I just wanted to make sure that you all knew about some of these sites, and then talk about ways to find other material to make your stories more than just the who, what, when, where, to really give more context and useful information into your what could have been just a quick daily story. So have any of you used census sites for quick information for stories about a community? Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to share a different page. I'm going to start going into some link pages here. And I want to make sure you have room. If you have me at like 100% taking up your whole screen, make it so that you got a little bit of room in the corner to pull up a browser, because I don't want to be just showing you pages. I want you to be finding some things. So if you have me at full, make sure that you have room to do something else. And I'm going to go into a page of links here that I think I have. Yeah. So does everybody have room to hit into Safari or Chrome and do some searches? So what I want you to do real quick is just go into search for the US Census site. And when you get to their homepage, search for something called Quick Facts. And I've already actually pulled it up here, but I want you to pull it up too. So everybody got something up with that? So scroll down when you get it up, and I'll scroll down here too. This is just, it's quick facts on a community. If you don't designate in that initial search and you just go on the quick facts homepage, it pulls up statistics for the US. So just scrolling here real quick, you can see, 333 million. And then it does breakouts by demographics. What percentage of the country is white, which it's showing at 75.8% here, versus Black, American Indian, Hispanic, right? Lots of different demographics that you can get for the country. But more than that, they also show things like median rents, median owner costs if you have with or without a mortgage for households. They talk about the percentage of folks who have computers and internet access, percents of high school and college graduates in that. So in this case, it's for the whole country, but lots of information depending on the story you're writing that might actually give it a little more depth, right? Especially if you're writing about something having to do with education and knowing what the education levels were for a specific area. And you can take this then and compare it to another jurisdiction. So for instance, I was seeing all US stats, and what about if I type in up here in the search box, let's type in Baltimore City. I guess I might need Maryland too. And come down, and then you start to see, like, if you're covering Baltimore, how that's, and it's, I guess we had somebody from the Daily Record in this Baltimore Sun, here's some basic demographics about that area that you're going to be covering. And you can do this for any community. You can do it by zip code, city, or state. And so, you start scrolling down and looking, how does Baltimore compare to the US? Percent white, 29% white instead of 75%. So right there, that's a big difference. What about, percent of veterans? Actually, it gives the number of veterans here, which is a pretty high total, 25,000 veterans living in Baltimore. Talks about median prices again for mortgages, and you can see how that compares for rent. The rent isn't that different for the monthly rent for the US versus Baltimore. But start to look for getting to know your community by who's living here, right? What are the demographics? Do people have internet access? I know that this gives percentages about living at the poverty level. How many are living in the poverty level in your community? It starts to give you a sense of things that not only might be useful for a particular story, but might be helpful for even just, background or context when you're writing that story. And then something that might spawn another idea for a story even. You could look at this and look for now. This is, I think, giving 2022 information, 2022. Go back 5 years, go back 10 years. What's happened in that city in that time frame? Compare that on a timeline, and you might have an idea for another story. So just knowing this is, this is vetted, this is verified information. This isn't somebody's speculation on a site. This is a good site to know that's available for information. What about, let's see, what about if you're in Maryland, and a lot of you are covering things for Maryland, where do you go to look up? You don't know who the elected officials are. You know there's a governor, new governor, it's Westmore. But what about if you have to go run down and cover some hearing in the summer? They have often off session, they have weekly hearings sometimes on policy issues. What about if you have to cover some committee meeting? How do you find quick information? Well, most states have these kind of sites. Maryland, it's called Maryland Online. And what's nice is they've got it all piled together onto the site. They used to just have it as hardbacks, and now it's lovely that it's here. But right, you can go to the legislative branch. There's so many members here, 188 members of the legislature. You're not going to know them all. How do you find out? Well, if you're sent to cover a specific committee, you can find that information. If you need to know something about a specific member, you can look them up by, people here. It's a wealth of information, and there's phone numbers, there's contact info. There's bio info on all the members of the House and the Senate. So I'm just scrolling down here too, but really a lot of information, and you can get it on the governor. You can also get it on members of Congress. So, how many members of Congress are there from Maryland, right? There are 8 members of the House and 2 US senators, and you can find information on them. So just be aware that it's all packaged together nicely here. And if you need to do a deep dive, a quick dive before you run out to cover something, I would highly recommend a site like this where they package all the government information in a tidy little space for you. And what's nice is this is coming from a primary source. You can go to you could search for the member site as well, but this is coming from researchers as well here on the site who've packaged it for you. So you know that this is going to be information that you can use right in your story. Okay, we're heading into another presidential election cycle, right? And probably your publications are going to be interested in local races, but also what's happening nationally that's going to affect their area. Most counties and states and the federal government have election sites that you can get a boatload of information in one place on. So the federal, if you had to do something, if somebody wanted a story on long shot candidates running for the US presidency, you could go to a site that's called the Federal Election Commission. It's based in Washington. They have amazing amount of searchable information on that site. And you could find out and search and find, everybody who's already declared that they're going to run for the presidency. Now, if they've already declared, they're probably, there's only a couple of candidates that we're aware of for each party that are probably credible so far. But a lot of long shot people run for these things just because. I've done stories literally on another round of long shot candidates because you get some really interesting people who run over and over and over and over again, even when they know they're going to lose. A year ago, one of my students in a second level reporting class, I had him write a story on Robin Ficker. Does anybody know who he is if you're from Maryland? You ever heard the name? He's a guy who's run over and over and over and over again for various offices in Maryland. And he's a lawyer who's been disbarred. And he's also a guy who was like renowned for being a heckler at some of the both Maryland and professional basketball games. So he was in the news a lot, and he was running again for governor. And I sent my reporter out, and he had to do a profile, and he did a profile story on him. And he started by just following him around as he went to like various Republican and Democratic events, just to see how he talked to people. And he got some really interesting quotes and color, just from following this guy around, being a fly on the wall, and then did some deep research into how many times he'd run and why he was running again. And he likes to get his names, but also issues he cares about out, and he doesn't care if he loses. So if you're into that kind of stuff, I kind of like quirky stories. But you can go and you can do a deep search into a site like the Federal Election Commission, or you could look on the state site for the state you're covering and see who's running for what. Now, it's early for the 2024 elections. It's a little bit early, but you could even go and find some info to see who's registered yet. I also always like to know who's registered. What's the voter registration? What's the party voter registration by party? And I pulled up this page. Why would we care about that if you're covering politics? Who cares how many people are registered by what party? What's the significance? What does it matter during an election cycle? Think about it. What about, okay, you're a candidate, you're a Republican running in Baltimore, and I don't know today what the voter registration is in Baltimore, but my guess it's probably 8 or 10. It's about probably 8-1 or 10-1 Democrat versus Republican in Baltimore City, right? It's skewed similarly in Prince George's County, where I have lived a long time. It matters because if you're running in a seat that's 8 or 10 to 1 Democratic and you're a Republican candidate, you've got a hell of a race. You've got a hell of an uphill battle to do anything, right? So I like to look and see if I drop into a new community, you can go to this page, this voter registration statistics page. I search for voter registration, and then if you see it in the left navigation bar, it comes up. And there's a button here for registration activity reports by month. And so I'm literally, let me see if I can pull this so you can see it. They have it through March. That's pretty good. We're in May. And you can see here, they break it out by county. And so it's total active registration by county and by party. See, the county lines are over here. And then you can look here and see Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, unaffiliated, other. And you can scroll down and you can see. So if you're in Baltimore City, 301,000 Democrats registered versus 27. So it is more than 10 to 1 Democratic in Baltimore City currently. And how does that compare to the state? Let's scroll down. So the state breakdown was about over 2 million Democrats and about 89,000 Republican. So it's more than 2 to 1 Democrat in Maryland. When I started first covering politics way back when I got out of college, it was 3 to 1. So it's gotten less Democratic, but it's still pretty hard numbers if you're running in a statewide race, right? You've got a hill to climb if you're a Republican. There are surprises, right? A couple of terms ago, Larry Hogan surprised a lot of people when he upset the Democratic candidate and he won in Maryland, Republican, as the Republican governor, and he served 2 terms because he figured out a way to appeal to moderate voters and to stay in office. But it's something to look at. It gives you a sense of the community, and so everybody could pop in here and say, well, how does Frederick skew, or how's Garrett County, and look at the numbers and see what the party registration is. Okay, so another kind of good piece of information. They'll also tell you, so here was the page on the state site of who's filed already. Now it's very early, so a lot of people won't have, but we've already heard some rumblings of folks who want to run for the US Senate in Maryland. Why is that? Why all of a sudden, Ben Cardin's been holding that seat for a lot of terms. Why are people now announcing for US Senate in Maryland? What happened? Anybody pay attention to that lately? About a month ago, Ben Cardin said he's not going to run again. He's old and he wants to retire. And so there were a lot of people already talking about, or at least announcing that they want to run. We're not seeing a lot here as far as official registration yet. But folks like the Prince George's County executive said she's interested in running for the seat, and there's no way she would have run for that if Senator Cardin hadn't said he wasn't going to run. She wouldn't have challenged him. So you can start following this, and in the next few months, you're going to start seeing people, even though they've verbally said it, but they haven't officially plunked down their registration yet. You can start following the candidacies for all these races throughout the state, and you can look here on the site to confirm who's doing what. Okay. And yeah, and the other thing, a lot of times you want to see, well, what happened last time that there was a big election? And you can look for the results from previous elections here too. So from 2020, 2020 would have been the last presidential election. 2022, we had some midterms here too. So you can go down and see who won what. And that gives you a sense too of how certain parties did in particular races, how they might do in the next time, right? If the Republican candidate got crushed in Maryland, then probably they'll have a harder time, unless there's something very different going on, have a harder time again. So those are just some really quick sites that they're government information. They're not advocates trying to pitch you a certain way. These are sites where you can get really basic information for important things that are on the horizon. Any thoughts on any of those sites so far, guys? Do you want to tell us about some sites that you rely on a lot as far as sort of primary sources for things that you've covered at school? Anybody want to throw anything into the mix here? Okay. Well, what I want to do, I think I have about 20 minutes or so, 25 minutes. I want to actually talk a little bit about, so those were sites that you can like bookmark, that these are government sites. These are things I can go to for backgrounding stories. But I also wanted to show you, like, if you're looking, how to be pretty confident that the site that you find is worth using in a story, or is it something that you're going to end up getting pie in the face over? Before I do that, I wanted to talk about one concept when you're out reporting, how to kind of keep generating ideas that are both daily stories and longer range stories. And I'm gonna take you to the source. When I was teaching a class a while back, one of our professors, Gene Roberts, who is a many-time Pulitzer Prize winner, I would invite him in just to talk about, he covered stuff during the civil rights era. He covered all kinds of really big stories, but he started his job at a very small publication in North Carolina. And he was kind of on the farm beat because that's kind of, it was one of the primary industries of his community. And he said he was often, if he didn't come up with an idea, he'd be sent out on doing something he didn't really want to do. And so he said one day he's in the newsroom and his editor says, one of our, Farmer Joe, we hear he's got like the biggest pumpkin. He's going to take it to the county fair. Go talk to him about his big pumpkin and we'll do a feature story. And I don't remember if it was a pumpkin or another vegetable. It was a giant vegetable that this guy had grown. And this poor young reporter is sent out to go talk to the guy who grew the giant vegetable. So he says, yeah, I went out there, and he would always keep, he would keep his notes in little reporter notebooks. And he said he always carried two. So one would be the notebook that he would put the quotes for the daily story in, right? He's going out to talk to Farmer Joe about his giant pumpkin. How'd you do it? How long did it take? How much does it weigh? That kind of stuff. The basic stuff for a basic story probably ran 8 inches, but it had a big old photo with it, with the giant pumpkin. But while he's doing that, he's kind of looking around and thinking, and he pulls out his second notebook and he says, what do you think about, I'm hearing that there's some developers trying to come in and buy up farms. Are they coming to talk to you? And so Farmer Joe starts talking about the developers who came and talked to him, and also gives them leads on other farmers that he knew that they've been out talking to try to buy up their farms to build stuff on it that are not farms. And he would start collecting this thread in this little notebook. If it were me, I'd go back and actually type it into my computer then too, because in a month you might not be able to read your handwriting scribbled into your little notebook. But every time he'd go out into the community and talk to folks who were either farmers or involved with farmers, he would ask them similar questions about, are they hearing about these developers coming in to buy up properties? And when he got to a certain point where he had kind of a sense of what was happening and who the players were, then he would talk to his editors and say, I think I'm going to have a story about what's happening in the community. There's a lot of interest in buying up these farms. And so then he gets the editor's buy-in. He didn't tell them immediately because he wasn't sure at first if he had an actual story, but he got enough that he had a pretty high confidence level that he was now onto a trend and would be able to commit to this for a deadline. But basically the key point I was trying to bring home is always be thinking beyond your daily story. So when you're out talking to people, are there things that they might know about that are part of a bigger story? And if you have 10 minutes, 15 minutes to then talk to them about this thing that might be a bigger story, do it. Because it's the only way, if you're at a site or publication that wants you to write 2 stories a day, It's the only way you're going to be able to generate some bigger stories while you're there, is if you squeeze in time as you go and put things into that, what's called, I like calling it the second notebook, because it's a way to visualize two different processes at work, right? The short term and the long range. And yeah, I would always then come in and type some notes into the computer, because my handwriting, the longer I was a reporter, the worse it got. And you get to the point where, like, oh my God, if I don't look at this right away, I'm not going to know what I scribbled into my notebook in a day or two. I would go back in anyway, even for daily, and try to clean it up before I write. But that's the way that throughout your career, you'll get ahead. You'll never get big promotions, bigger jobs, if you're only ever thinking of the daily stories, right? You've got to carve out time for these longer stories and be thinking about sort of the bigger picture stories. If you want to have real impact in your community, and if you want your editors to notice what you're doing, and then other publications to notice what you're doing, you'll start to win awards with those stories, those bigger stories. So I really, really can't underline enough how valuable that is, to always be thinking about it. These people are great, and this is an interesting little story, but is it the basis of some other trend or some bigger story that I can then, work on a little bit at a time and have later? It might take you a month talking to these people a little bit at a time, but it'd be nice to get it out. Oh, look, looks like Rebecca's put some nice links here that you guys can reference when we're done talking. So thank you, Rebecca. Links to other strong sites. Okay, so I do want to, any questions on that two notebook theory? That works for whether you're doing profiles or trend stories, but it really is important to be always chiseling away. I would also keep a running calendar. Do you all use Google Calendar or something like that to keep yourself straight? Start using that. Make sure that you're putting things in, deadlines for your daily stories, but also start putting in like some projected things that are bigger stories, and when you might be able to pull the trigger on that. Because otherwise you'll get overwhelmed if you're not having some system for keeping track of your stuff. Okay, I do want to pull back into my other share again and just show a couple of other real quick things before we run out of time. Let me go back into share. All right, so has anybody, Schiffer, you've probably used this, but have other folks used a lookup for a site called Whois? All right, so on your browser, go ahead and in the little corner that you can carve out, and I want you to type in whois.com. I think that's how I got it up. This is the site we're looking for. It's called a domain lookup, and it lets you look up, if you're not familiar with the site that you're staring at and you're wondering, well, who the heck puts this out? And it's not obvious from their about page or their contact page. This allows you to find a lot of sites. It's a sort of a registrar site for folks that have published stuff on the internet. And I like to type in, if I typed in WashingtonPost.com, we know what that is, but I want to show you what comes up when you type that in. So go ahead and type in WashingtonPost.com. Has everybody gotten it up? This domain lookup. So this tells you a little bit about who's running. Okay, we probably figured out it's the Washington Post site, but what else do we know about it here from this registrar site? So it tells you they actually registered the domain for WashingtonPost.com back in 1995 in November. Previously, they were running a paid, you had to pay for their site over AT&T interchange initially when they went online. And they realized in the mid-90s, oh, everybody else seems to be going onto this internet thing. Maybe we should register some space there too. So they did. And they actually launched online on the web in summer of 96. So not that long ago. I guess it seems long to you, but I actually was there for the launch of the website, and it was a pretty cool time to be on the internet. You realize how rudimentary some of the material was when you look back, though. But so it tells you when they registered, it tells you when they need to repay and re-register, coming up in November again. More importantly, though, it tells you where they're based. So if you weren't sure, this is a site that you were unfamiliar with, here's their address. There's their phone number. They still have a fax number. So some real basic contact information. And if it was a site that you really didn't know who these people were, you could call and talk to them and get a lot more information if that wasn't, really easy to figure out based by looking on their site. So I do urge this. I also, you've probably heard this before, but if you're looking at a domain name, which is the web address before the first slash, so it's something.com or something.org, how do you know what to value? How do you know, just looking at the domain, is it generally a category of information that's trustworthy? Like, so for instance, if you see .gov, what do you think when you see a .gov site? Is it generally trustworthy? Anybody? Anybody want to answer? What do you know if it's published as a .gov? What do you know about the publishers? What's it tell you? So if it's a .gov, it's going to be either run by the federal government or state or municipal government, right? And so, we're curious people, and we probably are skeptical of a lot of things as journalists. But if you see a .gov, what you can be sure of is it's published by federal or state or municipal government. It's not by me working out of my little tiny office at my Columbia townhouse, right? It's somebody working for a government entity. Now, we might have questions about some things the government publishes, but at least we know it would be similar to if you went to a press conference and the official was right in front of you and handed it to you on a piece of paper. You know that it's coming from this government official unless you hear the site's been hacked. So there's some level of credibility for sources, and that's why I was showing you sites that were state and government and federal government sites that have researchers who are putting out their information. Has a fairly high credibility level. What about .com? Who can publish to .com? Can you turn up your sound there, Victoria?
Anybody.
Yeah, so even though it's .com, it was initially intended for commercial sites, but anybody can buy a .com address. Did some of you have .com sites where you publish your work? I know a lot of journalists do. So yeah, you or I could go and plunk down some money and pay 25, 30 bucks a month probably to have space on a server and have a .com. So that starts to be, okay, it could be anybody. It could be Coca-Cola, but it could be Chris Harvey self-publishing from her home. What about .org?
Mostly nonprofits.
It was definitely intended for nonprofits, but again, you or I could buy a .org. So you'll see a lot of nonprofits with that URL, but it doesn't guarantee that it's a nonprofit group. So having, what about .mil? That's another one that actually you should know. What do you think that one is? Who can publish on a .mil? It's US military. So again, if you're looking for something from the Pentagon or from one of the branches of the military, and it's on a .mil, at least you know it's coming from that DoD branch, right? It's not somebody self-publishing a site. They can't have access to it. .edu is kind of in the between zone because there's a lot of really valuable information from research centers at universities that are published on .edus. But the reality is I teach at a university and I could publish a page about wire fox terriers and it would be useful only for comical reading. I have a dog, but I'm not a breeder. I'm not a vet. So you have to have a high level of being wary when you're looking at those .edu sites too. All right, but so we're going to be skeptical. Also, you're going to be looking to see, is the page filled with typos? Was it published recently? are there markers that show you that this is really not published by something that we should be trusting, right? When we're going to make our stories fleshed out. Has anybody used the Wayback Machine? Go ahead and type into your browser Wayback Machine. So this is an Internet Archive site, and you can literally use it. I actually recently used it because some stuff I had published on the Post was now behind firewalls, and I wanted to have it to show somebody. And you can go behind firewalls and look things up that are Internet archived by using the Wayback Machine. But for story purposes, it's useful because you can see what was published on a specific day that might have been a big news day. And so what I want you to type in is CNN.com in the search box and hit return. And come down on the timeline here. We're going to go to 2001 and go to September 11th. And what they've done is archive, obviously, September 11th, 2001 was a gigantic news day. And a lot of sites, we'll look at this one and I'll talk to you about why it looks like how it does, but I'm going to go ahead and try to pull it up. If we're all clicking, we might have a little bit of a slowness here. Is anybody getting it up? I had it up easily right before I talked to you guys. Here we go. A little bit of a lag. So this is CNN's website on September 11th, 2001, and it looks like it was the update from 4:30 in the afternoon. Obviously, the terrorist attacks happened early in the morning, about at 8:45 a.m. is when the first hit into the World Trade Center, and the first plane hit one of the World Trade Centers in New York. And they were updating throughout the day. What strikes you about how this page looks then? What strikes you about this homepage? I mean, you're used to seeing sites published now, and that's a lot of years later, 22 years later. It's stripped down. What happened was that, so I actually was about to start a class at this time in the morning, and had on a TV, I was in a newsroom, a lab to start a news writing class, and tried to click on the Post site, the Washington Post, and it was crash. Within short order, within about 15 minutes, it was crashed out. What happened was so many people were trying to click on sites that were either the Post or the New York Times or CNN that they just went down. They couldn't handle the flood of people trying to see what was happening. And so a lot of sites smartly stripped them down. And this one you'll see is, I think there was only one photo left on this page, because the load times got so much faster when some of the visuals were stripped out. But what's great about it for both reporting, if you're doing a look back story about 20, 25 years ago, and you go to the archive and you see what was published then, a lot of times it generates ideas for what do we want to do now with it, right? If they talk about some of the people who were killed in the attack, they might even have names in some of the stories, probably not from the first day, but later. Do you want to talk to those people again? Do you want to talk about children who were born on 9/11? Do you want to talk about families of people who died? But so going to some of these historic pages, and these links actually work. They're still hyperlinked and live. You can see stories from the era and get ideas for look back stories, which actually happen quite a bit in newsrooms, where you have an anniversary of some big thing and you want to do an update today, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years later. So it's really fascinating to look at some of these pages from big news days, see what was written, and see what you might want to do for an anniversary story. I know journalists could use it also for just talking about how good was the coverage. If you're a media writer writing about media, how did they do? Where did they drop the ball? And so I like to show this because it's really cool to go back and see these little vestiges of something happened a long time ago. and see what story ideas that might generate. So yeah, that was the Wayback Machine. How many of you have used, if you're trying to do a good story, this might be for that story, the second notebook story, what you did, the big pumpkin story, and now you're doing some bigger trend story. How many of you have used Google Scholar for either news or research stories? One, Bryce, you have. What did you use it for, Bryce?
Well, it wasn't necessarily like a big news story or anything like that. Back when I was at my first school design lab, they had this like school news article that they were doing. And essentially, I mean, I was just a photographer there, but they wanted me to look up some information for, I think it was like a something about the fall weather and different it was in comparison to like the weather 20 years ago. So we just essentially used Google Scholar to like look up news articles and stuff from back then to compare what it was like then to now.
Well, that's a cool use of it. I know one of my classes, a capstone class, we were doing a couple of semesters of stories on teen athlete concussions. And I spoke to our librarian at Maryland, the person who was assigned to our journalism school. And I said, where would you look? You know, what kind of research would be good? And she said, honestly, if you use Google Scholar, you'll get way beyond just sort of the breaking news stories that you might find that are accessible just from quick Google searches. You can find stuff from scholarly journals, magazines that you might not have normal access to. So, and you can find both articles in these journals and case law. And so I thought, can you guys go ahead and pull up on your browser Google Scholar? I was actually going to type in Clarence Thomas this time and leaving it for news. And I'm going to look at just Clarence Thomas Supreme Court. And you'll see the variety of stuff that comes up here that's way beyond stuff that you might see in a normal Google search. And so this is, you know, to broaden what you're seeing when you're doing stories or doing background or context for your stories, this can really help. You know, just finding a lot of different publications here, you'll see. Yeah, let's just click into one of these, a distinctive justice. Having a lot of slow times, and some of them might end up that you have to go and do another search in LexisNexis, but it would at least point you to some of the LexisNexis would give you something probably your publication would already paid for. But it gives you some much. Sorry,
if I could jump in. Bryce has a question. It's hard to see everyone's hands with their
yeah. What, Bryce, what was your question?
I'm sorry. Oh no, sorry, I don't have a question. Let me turn that off. I just raised my hand to talk about the Google Scholar thing.
Yeah, okay, so we got you already.
Yeah, sorry, my bad.
Thank you, no worries. But yeah, so this can just really broaden what you find, I guess is what my point. When you're doing searching, don't just go to Google, go to Google Scholar as well, and you'll see some of the other publications and books and information that pops up that might really broaden your storytelling. The other thing is it points you to other stories. So if you come down here and you look cited by, that gives you a sense too of how many other people think it was important or useful. So this one's cited by, we'll go to cited by 59, and that points you to additional stories on the same topic. So it's sort of like when you end an interview and you say, who else should I talk to? This is when you're searching for a story and it's telling you who else I should look into. So, and the related articles helps too. But so you could search for both news, and you could have searched for Clarence Thomas and seen opinions that he'd authored. I'm picking on him because he's been in the news a lot lately. And so just to get a sense of sort of, you know, how he comes down on some key opinions, you can find really quickly here with that search and scholar to see what he's written and what he's disagreed with other members of the Supreme Court, his colleagues. Okay, so I'd add that to your arsenal when you're trying to flesh out and give more context to stories. The other thing is, are you using advanced Google search, guys? Go ahead and type in advanced Google search into your browser. And it'll show you, you can get so much more specifics immediately by using this as your search tool instead of just going right to the straight up Google page. So let's type in something. I'm going to type in wire fox terrier. And I'm just going to put it in here too for the exact wording. And you'll see different ways that you can immediately start to narrow your search. You can narrow it by language. So if you wanted to look for some other language that wasn't English, you could immediately run down and change that. You can search, oh, I only want to see what's being published in a certain part of the world, right? So you could narrow it here. And since wire fox terriers are from Great Britain, let me see if they have United Kingdom here as a search. You know, you could search it by country, you could search by region and narrow. I must have scrolled. I'll just put United States here since I just saw that. Oops. Let's try US Virgin Islands. Okay, you know, when do you want to look? You can narrow your search now by time, last week, last month, last year. You can also say by format, I only want to look for PDFs, or I only want to look for spreadsheets, or I only want to look for some visual, you know, right? Like, do they have JPEGs? They have PDFs or doc, right? So Shockwave. So there are different formats you could look for. I'll put PDFs. And then you can also say, let's say you would actually put a visual file type and you want to know if you can reuse it. You could say, I only want to look for things that I can share even commercially, which would mean that it's in the public domain. Or, you know, share, Creative Commons would allow for some shares if it's usually it's for non-commercial and you give them some credit, give some credit to the photographer, but you can look for things by, can I use it again? So I just put that free to share. Let's see if anything comes up. So nothing free under the PDF. Let me go back to anything here. If you put a photo in there, you'll find some stuff that's public domain, but I'm just going to say any type here, not filtered. So nothing from the Virgin Islands on the wire fox terriers. So let me change that. Come up and put anything. But you get a sense, so you can search by region, by type, and immediately find what you're looking for different searches. So I do strongly urge you to start using advanced search over just straight up shorter Google searches if you're really looking for a lot of information. Rebecca, how am I doing? Do I have a minute or should I be wrapping it up?
You have about 10 minutes. So we're going to break at 11:30 for 5 minutes, and then we'll go into our, we'll talk a little bit about the mentor-mentee relationship. So,
okay. Well, I am very close anyway. I do want to urge you, if you haven't been using the, let's see, the Command 5, if you're on a Mac, do you know what Command 5 does, guys? Anybody? This is important. I've actually started using this in all my news writing classes now for fact checking. So if you're on a Mac, you hit Command F. If you're on a PC, try Control F. Go ahead, whatever page you pulled up when you did your search in advanced search, just hit Command F on that page. And it lets you search the page for specific something, right? So I could be searching here for wire fox terrier. And it's going to highlight every reference of this. I'm having my students do this now in every news writing class. Why do you think? Like I'll say punch in every proper name you're using in your story into Command F. How come? So anybody from Maryland, what's the Merrill F, guys?
You misspell a name or you get a fact wrong.
You get an F. So I'm teaching, I taught the basic news writing class this semester, and I was seeing a slew of Fs. I'm like, we got to get this nipped. We got to get this figured out here. What's happening? This is a really good fact checking tool. So type in a name. You just wrote your story. Before you turn it into your editors, put the name in here and look at every instance of the name on the page and make sure you spelled it the same all the way down. But before you look to see that it's spelled the same all the way down, make sure that you've spelled it right in the first place. So I had most of the students were doing great with this. And then I had one student who just typed it wrong all the way down. But he said, but I checked it in Command F. But unfortunately, it was wrong all the way down instead of just, one error. So get into the habit of doing this before you turn in your stories. Look for at least every proper name in your story to make sure that you're consistently spelling it correctly. Okay. And you can just go through and fix every messed up image quickly by using the Command F tool. It'll bring you to the correct spot every time. Okay. Let me see if we pulled up Google Trends here. Okay. And I want to hit Google Trends here. So go ahead and type into your search box the words Google Trends. And what this allows you to do, it's basically telling viewers who's searching for what on Google now, or within the last week or last month or last however many years. So let's go ahead, when you get to Google Trends, go to the Explore navigation button, and it lets you type in a term. I'm just going to, because this is like all over the news this week, I'm going to type in Joe Biden debt ceiling. And I'm just going to hit return. And I'm going to tell it, I want to look, not worldwide, I just want to look in the United States. What are we saying about Biden right now? And I want to look in the last month, let's see, the past 30 days. And I want to look on news sites, not arts and entertainment. And yeah, I want to do a news search on the web. But so it lets you see like what's been happening, where is it spiking? And it's really helpful. If you're saying, well, it looks like interest is spiking, maybe we should be doing a story on X. Like if this were a featured topic, not just something that was already in the news. You can see if people's interest is growing in something. I looked at this. Do you remember on the Super Bowl this year, Rihanna was the singer, the halftime entertainer. And what was everybody curious about when they saw her on stage? Do you remember? Anybody?
If she was pregnant or not?
Yep. She looked it, right? I know we're all looking at it because people started going on Twitter. It's like, is she pregnant? Is she not pregnant? So I'll finish you could overlay this before we get away from him, and then we're going to look for Rihanna and the Super Bowl. So I'm just going to compare him to Kevin McCarthy, because he's meeting with the Speaker of the House and they're trying to resolve whether or not we're going to pay our bills or end up in deep doo-doo. And you'll see there's a lot of overlaying interest in both of these guys and the debt ceiling. Oh, we should have added debt ceiling here too. And so pretty much people are searching on both names and very regularly now to see what's happening with the debt ceiling. So you can, with pretty good confidence, use some of those terms either as hashtags that people would search on debt ceiling. It's coming up with a lot of viewership, or you could use it in a headline and it would help get eyeballs because you're seeing a lot of searches for those terms. So it does help with search engine optimization to know sort of what's trending and how you might use that for headlines and for hashtag search terms. But it also could tell you, is there interest that might allow me to do a feature story on this? And so I'm going to close out these searches and I'm going to search on Rihanna and something to do with pregnancy. Let me get rid of all this. Good Lord, doesn't want me to close. Going nutty here. Let me just hit back and see if I can get back one. I'm stuck in my search. There we go. All right, so somebody's going to have to help me make sure I spell this right. Help me with her spelling, guys. Is that right, Rianne? Who's troubleshooting? You guys are laughing at me. I can see you.
It's so I feel like you're stuck in Fleetwood Mac right there. So it's not N-A.
Spell it for me, please.
So IANNA.
Thank you. I was stuck in Fleetwood Mac.
Which is not a bad place to be.
The
I mean,
H
let's
is in
be
the wrong
honest.
place.
All right, so it's so funny. That's one of my favorite bands, and you can see where my brain is. All right, so Rihanna, and we want Super Bowl. And first, we'll get a baseline with this and see. Okay, so did I do pass? We want more. We want to go back a year.
Rihanna is still spelled wrong. It's
Is it really?
Riha. And then
Thank you,
everything else is right.
Victoria. Here I am in one of the olds as well. So
Yeah, we need you guys
There
helping
we
with this. Thank you. This should have been something I actually jotted down so I didn't screw it up, but thankfully you guys know how to spell the pop culture figures. So I did watch it, and I did go onto Twitter while it was happening, and I'm like, everybody's wondering and it's not being answered. All right, so you can see, I guess, Super Bowl. What day was the Super Bowl? Is this the right day? It was either right then or right after. And then, so a lot of interest. And then you can add in, I'm going to add in pregnant. Oh, okay. I thought that would spike a lot higher. There was interest, but not as high as
wrong.
Oh, no wonder. Oh my God.
So close, 2 ends.
we'll get there.
Thank you. All right, so it did spike right up. People were raising questions along the line. Yeah, so it's again, should we be putting hashtags with this? And people were actually Rihanna pregnant. And then she came out and actually answered the question for everybody because it was spiking all over social media that day. So it can help you, you can say, am I crazy? Is nobody else wondering this? She looks pregnant to me. It would be a big deal. And yeah, it would be good for search terms, headlines, and actually a little feature story. Most people did a follow-up and said, yes, she said she is, right? So anyway, it's fun. It's useful actually for SEO. And it can lead you towards some feature ideas as well. If you can only spell them right when you put them in, it would be helpful. I think I'm going to stop right there before I misspell anything else. I'm going to start having to use F5 when I'm typing things into boxes here. I'm just going to stop the share. Anything that we should have talked about, guys, that you were raising questions at the start that we should have had a little conversation about? Did we answer any of your fears or worries? Did it help at all?